Hello and welcome to The Real Bottom Line. This is the podcast for entrepreneurs featuring entrepreneurs. And today, my very special guest is Julie Ellis. Welcome, Julie.
Hi, thanks so much for having me, Wendy.
Julie, why don't you give our listeners just a quick introduction of who you are?
Sure. I am somebody who started out in the corporate world and left that to found a business called Mabel's Labels. And after growing Mabel's Labels for 12 years and reaching eight-figure revenue and over 40 employees, we got a phone call one day to sell the business. And so ultimately we did. And it sent me down a path I never imagined being on, which was of leaving and working for someone else for a while, running another business, and ultimately learning a lot about people who achieve big things in the world, women who, look like overnight successes, but really, it's 10 years of blood, sweat, and tears that went into it, and kind of exploring, why we all get to where we do and why some of us get left in the dust of our to do lists instead of achieving the really great things we dream about.
Amazing, Julie. That's what a story. So much for us to unpack today. But let's start about how did you transition from corporate to building, an eight-figure business? Like, how did that happen?
Well, for me, it was about, I think, having kids
Mm,
and all of a sudden being thrown into a new consumer world in terms of all the things that we need when we have kids.
right.
And in those times we were sending our kids to daycare and daycare was saying please label everything. And when we asked how to label, what we were told was to use masking tape and a Sharpie, which, if anyone has ever tried it, it doesn't last. You put the thing in the dishwasher and the marker washes off. And so you're constantly relabeling and relabeling. And so we had an idea that we could do a better job about
Mhm.
it. And we also, I think, were all looking to leave our sort of corporate jobs in one way or another. We wanted change in terms of what we were doing. And so the timing was just right for us.
So there was a group of you?
There were four founders. Yes.
Wow,
Yeah.
okay. Let's we can dig into that just a little bit. With 4 founders,
Yeah.
I work with my husband, and so I know that sometimes when you have multiple people involved, it can be hard to
Yes.
figure out what lane you're gonna play in and who makes the ultimate decisions and how do you manage all that. So, how did you guys figure that out, and did you have shareholders agreements?
So, yes, we had a shareholders agreement. And we figured it all out pretty early on
Mhm.
because we needed to sort of divide the duties and get as much done and go as fast as possible. And so it made sense to have us each divide up and take certain responsibilities. And so we could start moving. And then we
Oh,
would come together, take away our lists, come back
yep.
together, make the next step, go away. And we just had this rhythm
Mm.
where we would kind of go away and come back with answers or more questions or next steps. And then we would kind of agree on direction and off we would go.
Sounds like you're
And
doing Scrum methodology without having a name to it, like you were doing mini sprints.
a little bit we were, definitely. And, over the years, responsibilities changed, departments flipped from, one leader to another
Yeah.
as various pieces of the business grew and became like more of a going concern.
Right.
um, we would sort of shuffle the duties as it made sense, and sometimes two departments that were not together in the beginning would join up later and those kinds of things. So we really kept an open mind, and we really had a formal structure around doing strategic planning, really thinking about what we wanted to get out of the upcoming year to 3 years and how we were going to go about doing it.
Why was speed important?
Well, we were first to market in North America as a children's label brand, and we were often very worried. Our first competitor entered the market 8 months after us.
Mm.
They ordered from us. They copied pieces of our website onto theirs. They used our suppliers. And so we were some of it was, a little bit of fear and a little
Mm,
bit of, trying to stay ahead of that. And if you look now at the market, I mean, we're talking 21 years in to Mabel's Labels, but that market probably has 150 competitors on the list now. So
wow.
we were, and what we were really afraid of was that somebody with a lot more money and a lot more know how than us was going to enter and be able to push us to the side.
From your corporate experience, what helped and did anything hinder, or did you have to unlearn some stuff as an entrepreneur?
Hmm. I think that the helping part was seeing from corporate how we didn't want to run
Mm,
our business, but we also had to be careful that you know, you can't compare a 5-person, 20-person, 40-person company to working in a large corporation in terms of, the structure and the level of process and the things that are done. And so you have to be very careful as an entrepreneur not to over processize things because then you become very weighted down and it's very difficult to move forward quickly and remain nimble.
it's interesting. I kind of think of that as about the level of formality, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so, when you start out and it's just the four of you, it can be super informal. But as you
Yeah.
grow and add people, it's almost like there's certain points that, okay, now we need this. We
Yeah.
need the employee handbook. And now we need,
Yes. And
now
it's
we,
that point where, like, suddenly the entrepreneur crosses the bridge of it's not the startup team. It's not those founding people who push and work really hard and will pull out all the stops to get something done or fix a problem. It's suddenly people who they have jobs. And it doesn't mean they're not going to work hard for you, but it's different than that family feeling that you will get in the early days. And it's hard sometimes to sort of rationalize that or accept that because that's when it can start to feel slow and heavy and like there are a lot of rules that maybe you didn't think about when you started your business.
yeah, it's interesting. I think it's a hard lesson when it's your passion, it's your baby.
Yes.
They're gonna love it the same way you are.
Yes.
Even if they truly believe in your vision and everything else, there's just that level of attachment that's different.
Yes. Definitely. It is different. And yeah, I think it's that place where, you've got to set aside the feelings that you have about the business and, sort of like moving from heart to head a little bit, in terms of how you think about things and what needs to happen next.
So when it came to the time to transition the business, were you approached or was this on the roadmap all along and it was just you were activating that start?
It wasn't on the roadmap. I won't say it was off the roadmap because we had done some legal structuring and some work to
Mm.
facilitate a sale more easily from a tax
Yep,
perspective and that sort of thing. But we did not have it was unsolicited, the phone call that we got.
yep.
And we had spoken with other people who'd been interested in the past. And we kind of always just had the attitude of, would you ever say no to having a conversation? Like, why wouldn't you have the conversation? So at that time, though, things were a little bit different because we had reached this sort of crossroads and we ran the company as co CEOs. We all had vice president titles, but there wasn't a CEO. We really were the co CEOs. And we knew that the next phase of really growing up into the mid 8-figure revenue range was going to require different things than we had done to get where we were. And so we'd just been exploring a lot of options. And then in from the side came that phone call. And so we had the conversation and it kept us interested. And so we kept talking. And that very quickly led to us selling the business.
Interesting. Okay, so do you mind if we dig in a little bit to some of the
Mm,
specifics? Because
sure.
I'm fascinated and I do a lot of work in this field. So, from the time of offer until money in your bank account.
From the first phone call to in time to having the money in our bank account was just over 5 months.
Wow, that's
So fast. It
What,
it was
what were you
hard.
what
It
was
was
due
hard.
diligence like? And, how was due diligence for you? Like, what was that process like?
A lot of work, very tedious. We had very good record keeping. We had a great finance team in-house and out of house who
Yeah.
helped us. We had a lot of things pulled together already, but it
Mhm.
was still shocking how much work it was.
Yeah. Now, so obviously the big leadership team, like the upper level was the 4 of you.
Mhm.
When did you bring in other people and let them in on this, what was going on?
We had to bring our finance person in pretty much from the start. So we had a director of finance and we brought him in very early and he was the only person from the team internally that was brought in
Until the deal was done.
until the deal was done and we could make the announcement. Now, I would suspect that given the work that finance did over those, particularly within that sort of like last 4 to 6 weeks, that
Mm,
team had a clue that something was going on.
yeah,
But it's also sort of the nature of a finance job that you're privy to things and you have to have the confidence,
yeah,
um, you know, it, that you have to have keep the confidences that you've been given. And so I think, I've never asked them, but I'm sure that there was, were questions about what was happening. And also because things like it was it was a cash-free, debt-free deal, so we had to get all the money out of the company. We had to
yeah.
pay everybody sometimes in advance.
Mm,
Everything we had to, cut off some of the consultants that we were working with, so we had to make sure we wrapped things up and, you're doing
yeah,
a lot of special transactions in those scenarios.
yes. Did you have any type of an earnout or obligation to continue on with the company for a period of time?
No.
Oh,
So, there was a small holdback that, was, in case there was anything material after the fact. But there was no earnout, and we were not obligated to stay. However, they did want us to stay.
yes.
So we had three of four founders who wanted to stay. One knew she wanted to go, and that was part of the deal making.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. What was the most, surprising thing that you ended up doing in due diligence? Like, the weirdest question they asked that you were like, "Wow, I didn't think of that."
I don't know if there was anything I didn't think about. Sometimes it was surprising to me, questions about a rented building or leased equipment or, those kinds of things surprised me a little bit. Like it seemed like it would be very straightforward. Like, here's the lease, here's those kinds of things. But really, I think it was just the level of depth that we had to go to that I found surprising.
And the company that ended up buying you, they had done a number of acquisitions
Oh,
or
they do
had
lots.
so they were really, really good at it, which
Yes.
is probably why.
Yes.
Tell me about the team you assembled for your side of the bid.
So we had someone who had been working with us as an operational advisor. So
Mhm.
he came onto that team, and then our accountant and a deal lawyer.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, the
and the
deal
deal lawyer was great. She had a tremendous amount of experience. She'd done over 200 transactions at that time, and yet only a handful of them had been with female-founded companies. And it was a real pleasure to work with her.
were you surprised at what the cost was? Like, I don't think we often contemplate when we sell that there is some serious checks we're gonna have to write to make sure we get the right deal.
Yeah, to make sure you get the right deal and to make sure you maximize everything that you can in terms of, yeah, how you negotiate, what you get, how it's handled from a tax filing perspective. Like all of those things are costly and very, very worth it. I mean, we didn't use any kind of broker to
Mhm.
help us with the sale. That would have definitely added to the cost. And so I think we just have to really think about it like it's the cost of doing business,
Yeah,
and trying to skimp in that area is not going to be helpful in the long term.
I agree. I think, there's a there's a price to pay for a cheap price sometimes, right?
Yeah,
And it won't show up for a year maybe, but
exactly.
it'll show up and make
Yeah,
you wish it
but
did.
suddenly you've got something that wasn't done properly, or something gets found after and the acquirer comes back to you. There's so many possibilities that you really just want to make sure that you put together a very clean deal and then it's done right.
Yeah. I love that you were able to, have a clean break. So many of these deals require the owners to stay on.
Mhm.
What do you think made that difference for them? Is it was it just that they're so experienced at this, or that you had built a company that was really kind of self-managing?
I think that it was both.
Okay.
We had a company that was running very well. We had good financial practices. We knew where, there were extraordinary expenses. And we ran to a plan that we were working on always.
Yeah.
And then I think that they did a lot of deals. And so they had a very strong sort of machine and process on their side.
Yep.
But that is not to say it was not a lot of work. It was not, it was 12-hour days
Yeah.
and then some days. It was, a constant, talking to people, communicating, generating of reports, giving more and more and more information. It was a lot of work, but it was doable because we were well prepared and they were very accustomed to doing this process.
It's so helpful when the other side of the table has been there, done that. So it's
Yes.
almost like a checklist as
Yes.
opposed to figuring it out as you both go type of thing.
Yeah, and I mean, they had an internal team who this is what they did, and
Yeah.
so that made it, relatively speaking, it made it, you know, easy is not the right word, but it made it smooth.
Yeah. And I think having sophistication across the table actually keeps your costs down for your team
Yes.
because they both know exactly what they're talking about versus one of the other sides having a lawyer that's not as steeped
Yes,
in M&A or things like that.
definitely.
So when did you leave and when did you start your new thing? What precipitated you finally leaving?
Um, well, I left very quickly, actually. I left after 6 months.
Okay.
Um, I had thought I would stay forever. That was yeah, I probably was still I had a lot of heart still in that business, and I think I thought I would stay forever. But of
Yeah.
course, things change so quickly after an acquisition, because, the new owner has ideas. Some of the strategic thought goes up to the new ownership group and the people that you report to. And for me, one of my really biggest skills is sort of sitting at the table with the puzzle and figuring out the strategy.
Yeah.
And that invitation wasn't as open to me,
Mm,
and what I was longing for was in the past. And
right.
so I very quickly kind of felt, I was a fish out of water. I wasn't really sure where I was going to land, what I was going to be responsible for. And, ultimately I decided that it would be the right time for me to go. And so I left after, I gave them a good amount of notice and talked about, what I wanted to do. And everybody was very supportive of me, and I, transitioned off the work that I had and stayed long enough to feel useless in the last couple of weeks that I was there. They didn't
Perfect.
need me at the meetings anymore. They didn't need my info or opinion or that sort of thing, and so that was good in terms of how I left.
Yeah.
And then I was out in the world.
So interesting. It feels like in the language I'll use sometimes is unique ability or zone of genius. And they had
Mhm.
stopped tapping into that. That wasn't required. So then that takes all the fun out of it, doesn't it?
Yes, yeah, that's exactly what happened.
So how have you going forward, you started another enterprise and
Yes.
and you're tapping into this zone of genius. Where do so you have some strategy level zone of genius, but where does that manifest? How does that show up?
For me, it shows up. So I very quickly, yes, the strategy zone of genius, I can very quickly see what are the paths, what are the pros and cons, and where should we go.
Yeah.
I'm good at a discernment of, what are the ideas to follow that are going to actually yield something.
Mhm.
Um, have operationally quite strong, and I have a gift of really managing departments that I have no subject matter expertise in. So when we started the business, finance became my department, mostly because I was a financial planner as we entered the business. So therefore it made sense for me to take on finance, even though, as you all know, not the same. But it made sense, right? Because
Yep,
I had a mind for numbers.
yep.
And then ultimately, over the last 7 or 8 years of the business, I led the IT department.
Mm,
And so I had 10 people in IT who, kept the backbone of the company running and did the programming. We had custom built software that ran our back end. So from the time people ordered on our website to the time we shipped it, we had a custom built software. They also worked on the website and built the website. And so my university degree is actually in dance. I don't come from that technical side background, but
ah,
learned how to find the right advisors and the right sounding boards to help me lead those departments
yes.
and help me get them working properly. And so that is really something that I do. I can go in and fix things that, or get things working properly, or amp them up if they're already working, without having to know everything about the subject.
That's amazing. So you weren't debugging the code.
No, no, I wasn't. No, you wouldn't have wanted me for that.
What I'm taking away from this too is it seems like you're good at reaching out for help.
Yes.
And, I find that having a coach or someone in your corner that it's invaluable.
Yes.
How is that translated into what you're doing now?
Mhm. Yeah. So I worked with a coach, and then we also always were really good at hiring advisors. We
Mm,
never had an advisory board per se because we could never see how we would fit all of the advisors together. We went more towards sort of subject matter expertise, I would say,
mhm.
in our advisors. But I mean, our accountant led our strategic planning sessions for a number of years.
Oh, neat.
He's a big thinker. And so we looked for people who could help us along the way. um, I would also describe my management style as a very coaching management style. So when I left the business, I set up a little consulting kind of practice, which ultimately consulting is not 100% in my lane, in
Mhm.
terms of where my skills are. Then I went and ran a business for someone else for a while, and that taught me a lot because that was the moment where I knew I wanted to build something for myself. And that,
Like, you real
I was like, "Oh, the second time around, I think I'm seeing a pattern here. I don't wanna work for somebody else."
I call it becoming unemployable.
Yes, I realized I was virtually unemployable.
Yeah.
And so that led me to becoming a certified coach
Mhm.
and taking on coaching clients who are at the leadership inflection point of, what got them here isn't going to get them there. So,
Mm.
really, really highly successful people who are very hard workers, who reach a point in their career, and this can be as an entrepreneur, as a corporate executive, as someone in a professional services firm who's becoming a partner.
Yeah.
That transition of, where all of a sudden all the things you did that made you so successful, and it's not working.
You
Uh those
it
people are that is the like little sweet spot where I come alongside and really help people move to the next, like letting go of the things that don't serve you anymore, in order to, instead of being the expert, you need to find experts that work for you that you can rely on. That's a really big shift.
So letting go of the day to day
Yeah,
and becoming a little bit more CEO like,
exactly.
whether that's in their business or whether that's in their role. Like, so
Yes.
I guess leadership type stuff.
Yes, and how to build frameworks and checks and balances and ways to assure yourself things are happening the way you need them to,
Mhm.
without doing it yourself, becoming a micromanager, not, doing all the things to your team that leads to less engagement and might lead to them leaving you.
Yeah, and honestly, it will make your business more sellable and valuable if
Exactly.
you've made that transition, because if you are responsible for everything,
Yeah.
then people are gonna be buying a job, and no one wants,
Exactly.
or maybe
Exactly.
they do, but I don't.
No, exactly. And I would say, throughout that time, as I started coaching, and then, very quickly after I launched my coaching practice, about 1 year in, we ran into the pandemic. And
Mm.
so, this sort of speaking and workshop business that I had was building at that point dried up a little or completely. And I started doing a lot of coaching. And I
Mhm.
became very curious about why some people go on and achieve these great, big, impressive things. We see them, we see we think they're an overnight success, but really it was 10 years of blood, sweat, and tears. And all of a sudden, why is it some people can lever themselves to those big dreams and
Mm,
others, I call it getting caught in the dust of our to-do lists. We have our head down, we're clearing emails, we're doing all these things, but we're not attaching the activities that we're doing to the dreams that we have and the places we want to go. And so I started to really examine that. And I think, for me, when I left Mabel's Labels, we had climbed for pinnacles. We
mm,
climbed and climbed and climbed the whole time we owned that business. And in fact, we climbed to a point where when we got recognition for something or we hit a milestone, we would minimize it. We would say, "Oh, but you know, we wanted more." Well, it should have been somebody else. I'm sure there's somebody better than us. Those kinds of things. And
mm,
so when I got to the plateau at the end where, I left the business and it was a real plateau, I did not know what to do. I did not know how to sit on the plateau and rest and restore myself and figure out what the next climb looked like. I knew I wanted things, but I lost sight of the sort of big thinking and the like, what do you mean I can't do that? I can do that. Kind of attitude that
mm.
had taken me a really long way when I was a part of Mabel's Labels.
So, I feel like I could talk to you for days. However, we kinda gotta start to wrap up. So Julie,
Mhm.
our audience is mostly entrepreneurs. What is the if you had one big piece of advice that could transform someone, what would it be? Like, or is yeah.
I think it's to be strategic about how you take those steps forwards in your business. Because even if you decide you don't want the biggest to continue to grow the business, let's say you want to get it to a certain level and you want to try and keep it there because
Mm,
there's a lifestyle it affords you and you want to maybe pass it to your kids or something different, like not necessarily the world domination kind of goal. That's, I think, great, but you've got to be strategic about not just letting things happen to you because
mm,
it's the like I talk a lot about decision making and how to make decisions, and not making decisions is a decision. When you wrestle with something and you just decide to put it on the table and leave it there for a while, that's a decision. And
mhm.
you then things happen to you instead of you sort of writing the path that you want to be on. So whether you want to grow the biggest company in the world, whether you want to grow it to a certain size where it can give you the lifestyle that you want to have, all of those are great, but don't let them happen to you. Let it be intentional.
Whew. Thank you, Julie. How do people get a hold of you?
They could find me at my website at julieellis.ca.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. I think the real bottom line is almost in your last sentence. The real bottom line here today is be intentional and deliberate about where you want to take your company.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Julie.
Thanks for having me, Wendy.